Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today. It's our great pleasure here to welcome you to the first symposium of the Learning Support Group here at JCU Singapore, focusing on the challenges in providing learning support to students in higher educational institutes in Singapore. I'm Kajol Larcott.
And my name is Chai Yun, and we'll be MCs for this morning. Okay, so we'd like to just mention some things to take note of first. So firstly, please turn off your mobile devices or keep it to silent mode during the event. Second, do take note that photos and videos will be taken during the event. And lastly, please feel free to log in to our Wi-Fi, which we will be showing the information for later on, because we will be using the Slido platform for Q&A, and each specific event code will be given for each session. Okay, so as I said, my name is Chai Yun, and I'm a peer tutor here at JCU Singapore. And the things that I teach here is mathematics and statistics. So generally, what we do is we help students from the Bachelor of Psychological Science program, and we help them out in anything that's related to statistics, really.
I'm Kajol. I'm the peer tutor for English. So as Karin said, her specific course is for the degree program, but however, we at the English department, we cater to all courses here at JCU. We're not really specific to a certain degree program, so we cater to all the students here at JCU. We help in students with their academic writing and also with conversations, daily conversation speaking skills.
First, I would like to invite Ms. Hui Ling Toh Heng, the Learning Advisor here at James Cook University, to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the symposium. So, before I call on our keynote speaker, Professor Chris Rudd, let me tell you a little bit about him. All of us who are staff here in private universities here in Singapore know that our campuses are very multinational places, and James Cook University Singapore is no exception. So we have a very international student body and a very international staff. And our Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Chris Rudd, who's from the UK, is attests to that. Now, in a previous life, before he joined us here, Chris had actually visited Singapore in 1979 as a cadet on an OCL ship. So what does OCL stand for? OCL stands for Overseas Container Limited. Now it's part of the P&O line. I had to Google that. What was he doing on that ship? Well, Chris is an engineer by profession, so I would imagine that it clearly involved engines and machines, not a cushy job. Then Chris went on to join the University of Nottingham and spent 25 years there. First as a lecturer, then as professor, then as Dean of Engineering, then Pro-Vice Chancellor of the university. He then leapt across the continent from Europe to Asia and landed in China as Provost of the Ningbo campus of the University of Nottingham there. While he was there, he expanded the multicultural space for the local students. So how did he do that? Well, he developed the first rock climbing sites in the area. And as a proud Northern Englishman, he also started the first K-lit band in Greater Shanghai. A K-lit, for those of us who've never heard of it, and it's spelled C-E-I-L-I-D-H, is a social event with Scottish or Irish folk music and singing, and traditional dancing. It's folk music. And really, it's quite a feat, considering he persuaded classical musicians among the students to relax, loosen up, and play K-lit music. He then added to the multicultural diversity here in James Cook University when he joined us in February of this year as our Deputy Vice Chancellor. He tells me, and these are his own words, enjoyed the support of our wonderful JCUS team, survived his first CPE audit, a daunting task, as well as a series of barbecue evenings at Eden Hall, residence of the British High Commissioner. So I wonder which was more daunting, the audit or the barbecues. Anyway, as it is summer 365 days of the year here in Singapore, we hope he has embraced the sun, the tropical rain, the heat, and the humidity. Without more ado, let's now hear from Chris himself. It gives me great pleasure to call on our Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Chris Rudd, to give us his keynote address. Professor Chris, please.
So, welcome to JCU and what I hope will be a stimulating exchange of ideas and discussions about an area which I think is hugely important. And one of the really refreshing things about landing here in Singapore less than a year ago was just learning about the great professionalism that Hui Long and the team brought to encouraging our students to pass successfully through the diploma and degree cycles here. It was quite new to me and all the more stimulating for that. So I was delighted when Nimrod knocked on the door and said, would you come along and speak at the event? So I'm delighted to do that. But then he said, oh, and by the way, it's a keynote, not one of your usual 5-minute infomercials about JCU. So, okay, no pressure. I thought I need to talk about something that perhaps adds a little bit of value. And so what I hit on was the fact that most of us, I know not all of us, but most of us inhabit what would be regarded in the media as international branch campuses, even though we might not use that term in any of our marketing blurb. That's, I suppose, biologically what we all belong to. And so I thought perhaps it's interesting in this year, 2019, to reflect on how the branch campus system has evolved and what we contribute to society, what we contribute to our home institutions, what we contribute, you know, even to our students, perhaps, in a way that is perhaps a bit different than it might have been 20 years ago or so. And I say that, I suppose, informed by, of course, having been in Singapore for 8-9 months, but then having spent 4 years immersed in an analogous environment in China, but then, of course, also having been part of a much larger university which was evolving itself as it built institutions overseas. And I think there's some interesting anecdotal evidence in all of that. So anyway, let's see where we go with it. So where do we begin? I know that Robert Boyle did study overseas with Galileo in 1626 or something like that, but actually, if we want to find the roots of what the modern institutions that we inhabit, probably the best early example is Johns Hopkins in Bologna, which is essentially an international relations school, which is still going, you know, so 70 plus years later. Not much really else going on at that time, except then in the 80s, for political reasons, a lot of US collaborative universities opened in Japan aimed at developing bilateral relations, of course, most of which had a short-term injection of cash, and most of which failed immediately after the withdrawal of public funds. And that's quite a familiar story in terms of many of the early startups about short-term expectations and no long-term planning. But really, it was the WTO, which was, before I started researching this talk, unknown to me, that enabled a lot of the transnational education that we're now all engaged in to happen in the 90s. And of course, that was marked largely by US, UK, and Australian institutions coming into Southeast Asia and East Asia. And these are the kind of familiar models to all of us, I think. But as you'll see in a moment, I think there are other dimensions that we can think about to the same concept. And of course, the traditional stamping grounds for Western universities going east UAE, pretty crowded market these days. Dubai and Abu Dhabi predominantly, looking beyond the oil years and looking for ways alongside tourism to transform their economies. China, of course, opening up in early 2000s and looking for something a bit different. I think China was looking for new capacity. It was looking to internationalize its research capability and also to drive reform amongst the domestic universities and to learn from foreign operators in doing that. Malaysia, of course, another pretty crowded market these days, clustered largely around KL and JB, Qatar figuring there, and of course Singapore, having kind of gone in fits and starts from a policy point of view in its sometime desire to establish itself as an international education hub. But what a stupid place to do it, as I'll talk about in a moment. The other point I wanted to make is that the traditional model about the old world coming to the new world is of course not a constant, and the tide is actually running both ways now. We saw Xiamen University, for example, going into Malaysia. A couple of years ago, we've seen Indian and Chinese universities going into North America, and this wonderful theme park on the image there. Oh, that's the Beta PKU HSBC Business School just south of Oxford. And when we add it all up, I mean, if you look at the Observatory report, which does a census every year of international branch campuses, and a great information source, about 260 things that could be regarded as real campus operations with about 260,000 students enrolled. So quite a significant chunk of the domestic capacity, particularly in this part of Asia. But what about Singapore then? So Singapore, what a stupid place to start an operation. With the most rapidly aging population in the region, probably the lowest GDP growth, and the highest real estate cost. My tongue, of course, is in my cheek. But this is a serious challenge for Singapore, and not just for the private providers, but also for the domestic institutions, of course. The polytechnics, the schools, we're seeing school closures and school mergers all around us. But fortunately, of course, we are surrounded by pyramids with much more stable bases. I don't know if you can read the tags there, but top left is India, top center is Philippines, top right is Myanmar, bottom right is Laos, bottom left is Indonesia. And Indonesia, what is it, with something like 40 million in the 18 to 25 bracket. So, and obviously accompanied by rising GDP, rising urbanization, so growth of the middle classes, and hopefully assuring the market for the next 10 or 20 years for most of us. But I thought the most important thing was to think about, what's the value proposition for the international branch campus, because they're seen as very different things from different people. The blind man feeling the elephant. It's a different entity to the home institution than it is to the staff in country, to the students, to their parents, to the local stakeholders, and so on. And of course, for the students, getting a prestigious degree, being educated in an international environment, taking away those multicultural benefits, that means that when MNCs operating in the region are looking for talent, then they need to look no further the international branch campuses. And I think most of us could justifiably feel very proud of the employment record that we have. And then, of course, for families, they're getting value, and they're getting a relatively firm assurance on student safety as compared with the prospect of their kids flying to the east coast of the USA, for example. For the host country, I think that largely depends on where they are in the economic growth cycle. It could be that the IBCs are providing capacity, they're providing educational reform, and they're also driving economic and social reform, helping economies and societies to transform. But most of us have probably thought about it from the point of view of the providing institution, in that, yes, we provide access to market, we provide research capacity, we provide access to talent, both student talent and faculty that we might not otherwise be able to access. Here in Singapore particularly, opportunities for international business engagement. Our home campuses in Cairns and Townsville can't begin to compare with the opportunities that we've got operating in this amazing international business hub. And then I think the other thing that we haven't really started to develop as a value proposition is that the fact that we are small, we are agile, we have got very committed local staff, we've got usually very well educated local staff, and so we've got a lot of capacity for innovation. I went to a really interesting seminar hosted by The Economist yesterday, where they were talking about the emerging model for Asian business leaders, and the fact that actually most of the multinationals who've got operations in and around ASEAN are increasingly regarding that as the most important talent pool, the most important source of margin, and the most important source of innovation for the business. And I think actually that has got very strong resonances with what I see in the international branch campuses that are operating here. And then of course for faculty, people like us, then opportunities to do research in market, lifestyle changes, career changes, and so on. And then so what about the environment that we create? This of course will be what will occupy your thoughts most of the day, I think. The fact that we are relatively young, so we're operating with fresh ideas, fresh infrastructure. We don't have the Victorian operating models that still prevail in a lot of the Western countries. Our faculty have broken out of the domestic framework, which certainly in several Western countries has been skewed with research assessment, I think to the detriment of the education experience for students, and even to the detriment of creativity and innovation. We teach our students with highly internationalized faculty in highly internationalized environments, and so they get a much wider perspective than they would in a domestic institution. But of course we've got to spend a lot of resource on finding those students, and consequently we've got a big investment tied up in every undergraduate who comes in and register, and therefore we care very much about making sure that they move on to successful outcomes, progressing through the degree program and into a high quality employment opportunity. And that means that we invest more in support and retention. And I think finally the other thing I would observe, having come from the UK where a lot of the domestic providers have become rather bloated and probably over capacity for the infrastructure that they're operating in, I think that we offer a much more personalised learning experience, and I'm sure that will be a resonant feature of your discussions later this morning. I just wanted to finish up by saying something about research. So I'm an active researcher, and I continue to believe that research should be an important component of what we deliver when we roll out international branch campuses. There's a number of dimensions to this. One of them is about making sure that you can recruit and retain the best staff who will be ambitious in their research. But also, of course, it provides an opportunity to demonstrate payback to the host country, that we are providing an impact for local society, supporting business, supporting economic development, and supporting societal development through the research that we deliver, whether that's in engineering or business or tourism, hospitality management, or the built environment, or health sciences, all of which has got a contribution to make in Singapore and beyond. Of course, the other challenge that goes with that is that we're small, and because of the nature of the international operation, often the staff turnover is much higher than it would be in a domestic institution, and therefore we've got to be quite careful about targeting investments so that we build critical mass activities and so that we can invest for impact and for lasting impact. And then I think the last point I want to make is that there is something also about the internationalized environment which provides an especially added value, and that's because of international cooperation. So international cooperation tends to have a disproportionate driving effect on citations, and citations of course drive research reputation. And it's very interesting, FWCI, Field Weighted Citation Index, which is a pretty good proxy for research quality and a pretty good correlation with international league table ranking. And I remember a couple of years ago, having arrived in China, I did a field weighted citation index of the leading Chinese universities to look at how they were, I suppose, succeeding over time, succeeding in internationalizing, in having international impact. But I also wanted to understand where the international branch campuses sat within the overall pecking order. And the key will be fairly small for you to read, but I've listed there the time series for Tsinghua, Beida, Nanjing University, Zhejiang University, Fudan, and a couple of others. And it was quite extraordinary to see that actually the highest field-weighted citation index for all of those operations were 2 international branch campuses, both of which had been operating for less than 10 years. My previous place in Ningbo and NYU in Shanghai. I'm not suggesting for one moment that if you did the analysis for Singapore, you'd see the same effect. But what it does demonstrate is that international cooperation and having an internationalized faculty is really, really powerful in driving your research reputation. Because the simple fact was, in our little Chinese operation, pretty much everybody came from somewhere else, and pretty much everybody continued to collaborate with the country and the institution that they came from. And that's really powerful. So, I'm going to leave it there. I think International Branch Campus story is a long way from over, but it does now represent a significant chunk of capacity, especially in emerging markets. And it's a story which is very far from being over. In addition to the east-west and west-east traffic I mentioned, then of course you've got Africa, and you've got, you know, kind of Pan-African institutions. You've got Chinese institutions going into Africa, Russian institutions going in. You've got all kinds of dynamics at play. But what's clear here in Asia is that it's beginning, I think, to normalize, that the option of taking a foreign degree in country is actually not a groundbreaking thing to do. It's actually quite a normal thing to do, and that's terrific. I do think that we've all got something very special in terms of the dynamism and the creativity that goes on in our operations, because we've got to be, in order to survive in a very competitive market. And I think there's a great deal more that home institutions could do to get leverage from that, rather than just importing international student numbers. And I think also perhaps why I find this environment so rewarding is that actually we've turned the clock back, and that we're operating in a much more intimate way with our students, that we're providing a much more personalized experience, and we're operating at a scale that my home country wouldn't have seen probably for 30, 40 years. And with those thoughts, I will finish. Thank you for your attention and wish you wonderful discussions for the rest of the day. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you, Professor, for those wonderful insights. Please join me in welcoming the Campus Dean of James Cook University, Singapore, Professor Abhishek Bhati, for the welcome speech.
Ladies and gentlemen, very good morning. It gives me pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural symposium, Challenges in Providing Learning Support to Students in Higher Education Institutions in Singapore. I can see several familiar faces here, lots of good friends, old friends, and I'm sure it also gives me the opportunity to make some new connections, and same would be with all of you in terms of making new friends and getting to know each other and sharing some of the good practices. I echo what Professor Chris Rudd mentioned about the challenges and the opportunities to international branch campuses, or PEIs in other words, in Singapore, where we as a higher education provider are mandated to provide challenging environment for our students so they can learn new skills and become better individuals. But that entire endeavor would be fruitless if we don't provide relevant scaffolds and supporting mechanisms. Support for international students when they come to Singapore, or international branch campus in other words, where they would, whether it's language support or transitioning support or looking into learning styles and approaches. Support to students in terms of counseling, support to students in terms of peer review, peer support, peer advice. And a lot of these activities are, at least in JCU Singapore, clubbed under the Learning Center or the learning support services that we provide here. And I'm sure in your operations they may be clubbed together under other labels and departments. But it is important as a higher education provider that we see the seriousness of providing this support activities for students so that they can perform better in their education endeavors, they can realize their full potential, and of course become better individuals. Here in JCU Singapore, the learning support activities span quite wide. In addition to providing structured workshops, they also have one-on-one impromptu sessions, and the learning support team also takes care of few very innovative approaches such as post-enrollment assessments, whether it's for language assessment or even numeracy assessment, so looking into both literacy and numeracy skills. And of course, the learning support is also interested in seeing progression of students moving up within the program, or even vertical or horizontal movement of students and the satisfaction on campus. One of the key developments, or I think achievements, of the learning support, and the credit goes to my colleagues in the Learning Center, and of course the peer tutors that I see, some of them are sitting here, is the EMAS peer tutoring setup that we have here, where we provide or we engage students, current students, to work with fellow students and give them advice, and talking about payback, as what Professor Rudd said, starting that activity of payback right as a student. A quick glance at the program just today shows that there are a whole lot of activities which are happening today, and I'm quite interested in some of those, looking into how learning support vary across different organizations. What are some key philosophical underpinnings of learning support that should be provided and that should be maintained? How we can engage students, whether it's through peer support or peer tutoring or other mechanisms, that should be looked into. And of course, the elephant in the room is technology. How is technology utilized in enhancing student experience, and of course even providing learning support, which may be face-to-face or beyond the normal office hours. So I look forward to several of these conversations and taking part in some, and I'm confident that you will have a very fruitful day today. And at that note, I wish you a very fruitful symposium today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Abhishek, for the wonderful sharing. So let's begin our first session. The topic for this session is the theoretical and practical underpinnings of learning support in higher education institutions. So our speakers are Dr. Nimrod Delante and Ms. Hui Ling Toh Heng, who are both learning support advisors for the degree program here at JCU Singapore, as well as Mr. Lai Fook Ming, the head of the learning development team in SIM Global Education. So just to share a little bit more about our speakers, Dr. Nimrod helps undergraduate and graduate students to improve their academic skills in order to be successful in their subjects and to accomplish learning. For Ms. Hui Ling, she provides consultancy and run workshops on academic skills for students who need assistance with academic writing and APA referencing. And last but not least, for Mr. Lai, through the SIM Student Learning Center which he started, he conducts workshops on peer leadership, metacognition and learning strategies, and coaches students on academic writing and oral communication skills. So this is the information for the Wi-Fi and the Slido. So the Wi-Fi name is JCU Guest, and the username is guest@jcu.edu.au, and this is the password. So more importantly, the event code is H344. So when you go into Slido, please use the event code. Okay, so this session will be moderated by Mr. Michael Joyce, and all speakers will have 20 minutes to speak, which will be followed by a 25-minute Q&A. So Dr. Nimrod, please.
The first topic is theoretical. It's more conceptual, so it's quite up there. So bear with me. I think you can engage me as well with some questions later on. I am tasked to problematize learning support, and I am also tasked to actually discuss a few theoretical lenses about why we do what we do. So very important question is, what is learning support? Who are we? And where do we belong? Well, we've read quite a lot of literature, and we realized that learning support is quite a vague concept. And for some, it's perceived to be inferior because, you know, these labels will come. We're not lecturers nor tutors. We're learning support. So in the literature, you might be able to encounter the phrase third space. It's like we don't have a very definite space. We belong to the third space, where as learning advisors, our role is hybrid, blended, and we are border crossers. And the very dominant, strong spaces that we cross to and fro are actually the academic space and the professional space. And I believe you feel the same way. You feel the same way, this kind of struggle that we have. And it can be a very good struggle, actually, for us to identify who we are, why we are doing what we are doing, and where do we belong. Perhaps at the end of the session, we can collectively and cohesively create and name and concretize that space. Because there's a lot of here and there phenomenon, or even sometimes not here, not there phenomenon. And to some people in the academe, we're like a mop that does a lot of magic, a mop that does a lot of quick fix, or in some terms, a Jack or a Jane of all trades. Now, I'm not going to answer that question, but maybe in the conversation later, Fook Ming, our colleague from SIM, would be able to offer you some answers to these questions. However, I'd like to share some conceptual directions that's happening in JCU Singapore. I am proud to say, on behalf of the Learning Center team, that it's a very dynamic team. It's not static. It's dynamic, it's growing, and it's developing. And I think that's a good thing. We have started this year to eliminate the term support in all of our materials, whether it's, you know, abstract materials, you know, the tacit knowledge, and the explicit materials that we share with the world, because we would like to move to the direction of using more positive verbs such as advise, guide, facilitate, and teach. And whether we like it or not, for those of you who are here today, I think you will believe with me that as learning advisors, we are academics. We are teachers because we have academic qualifications and teaching certificates. So I don't know. My position is whatever names we have, academic tutors, writing tutors, learning and development staff or professionals, the underlying structure is that we are teachers. And we are trying to eliminate the term support because it suggests a more diminished capacity. And you know the stigma that students feel when they are sent to a certain support center. So as a matter of fact, on a material, physical aspect, we are changing our name from learning support to learning center. And we're changing our name from learning support advisors to learning advisors. Now, the very difficult challenge for me is to share with you some theoretical lenses. So I think for us to understand these theoretical lenses is for us to believe that we are teachers. And our main goal is to help students accomplish learning. So one of the lenses that we are using in JCU Singapore, it might be different on your case, is the rhetorical lens. We believe that teaching is an art, and teaching is a rhetorical act in which there is this practical art of discourse. When we enter our classrooms, we have intentions in mind and heart, right? We have specific intentions in mind and heart, and our interaction with students in the classroom is rhetorical. There is this practical art of discourse, and when we talk about practical art of discourse, we go back to Foucault, the Foucauldian sense of discourse, which is a system of possibilities for the creation of knowledge. Our goal is to co-create knowledge with our students. If not, then why should we be in the classroom, or why should we be teachers in the first place? Rhetoric runs to, the past, the ancient times. Aristotle was an author of rhetoric. In modern times, we have Kenneth Burke, who actually wrote a grammar of motives. And with rhetoric, we are very concerned of the fact that teaching is about the power of language and persuasion. Teaching is about intent. And art and strategy. I have 2 more minutes. So this is the problem. And in classroom teaching, we view problems from the rhetorical lens as social exigencies requiring collective deliberation and judgment. One example I'd like to give is this very common cultural problem. Students view us as givers of knowledge, so feed us with knowledge. But the culture of teachers is, let's co-create knowledge. And there's this conflict in between these 2 cultures. And it's difficult to actually break and to solve that conflict. And from the rhetorical lens, what can we do? We can actually use the power of rhetoric. We use and employ those rhetorical acts in the classroom, such as imperatives. We tell them what we do because we know what's best for them. We explain concepts with them. And if these 2 things don't work, what can we do in the end? It's beyond our control. We appeal to their emotion and sense of reason. For example, I think you really have to think about this and get back to me. So you're now appealing to the student's sense of autonomy because that's rhetoric, From rhetoric is, and a very powerful rhetorical act is appeal. By the time we feel that nothing is working, we appeal to the emotion and sense of reason of the student. And maybe in the end, the student can think over about the issue or about the problem. Because the main intention of teaching from the rhetorical lens is students must accomplish learning and understanding. 2 more minutes, sorry. I'd like to share another lens, and this is the phenomenological lens. It runs back again to Craig, it runs back again to George Gadamer, and it runs back to Carl Rogers, who believe in the experience of self and others in dialogue. I consider teaching as a constant dialogue with students and a constant dialogue with myself even. I even talk to myself. I talk to my mind, and my mind talks back to me. So that's phenomenology. deals with active consciousness as well as lived experience. So dialogue happens if it's authentic and genuine. If it's not, dialogue will die. It will never happen. So when we want to sustain authentic dialogue in the classroom, we have to need to understand our students, who they are, what are their challenges, and what are their weaknesses. And in the classroom, well, from the phenomenological lens, we have to avoid divisive thoughts about who our students are, because it's not good. Sorry, give me one more minute. So from the phenomenological lens, I kept asking myself, why am I here? And why am I actually, what is the essence of what I'm doing? Why am I a teacher or a learning advisor? So there is this constant dialogue with myself. And these are the answers I've actually arrived. On a physical life world, I am in constant dialogue with students and even fellow teachers. But deeper reflection led me to believe that as a foreign teacher, I'm not a Singaporean, I'm a foreign teacher in Singapore, but still I'm a teacher like you. I am in constant dialogue with employment. Employment is a voice that keeps telling me, hey, you have to do something because you're employed here. If not, the government will send you back. Well, that's my personal experience. So it's a non-human other. Sometimes we talk to a non-human other. We just don't talk to people. We talk to a non-human other. It's so abstract. But deeper reflection, because I believe that teaching is a vocation, I realized that a more profound non-human other I realized is passion. Because if we are not passionate about our craft of teaching, we won't be here. And we will never linger, and we will never do the job that we do every day. It's the voice, it's this non-human other that keeps me, or that helped me to answer why I'm doing what I'm doing. And last but not the least, I think all of us are very familiar of the humanistic view that as a university, we have to nurture, we have to create a nurturing teaching and learning culture rather than torture our students. And we have to remove the preconceived notions that our students have deficiencies, deficits, and a lot of disabilities. Because whether we like it or not, our students have the capacity to actually achieve potential. So we have to create those conditions that allow our students to test their creativity, curiosity, and their sense of agency. And with that, I'd like to end that the rhetorical lens, the phenomenological lens, which I hardly can speak because it's long, and the humanistic lens is, they're not existing in silos. They're talking to each other. They have a very dialectical relationship. They construct each other as theories. And I think the end goal is that students, at the end of the day, should direct their own voyage and not us. Thank you. And so with that, I'd like to give now the floor to my colleague Willing, because this is also a very good question to answer. As learning advisors or teachers, are we generalists or are we specialists, and why? Thank you.
Thank you, Nimrod. Okay. All right. So the question that I'm asking is, do we view ourselves as generalists or specialists? It's a simple question, but as we all know, whatever is branded as simple is anything but. So we decided that in order to answer that question, whether we're generalists or specialists, we need to have a definition for what we, as learning advisors, do. We also need to look into, as Nimrod has pointed out, the theoretical framework for the work we do in learning support. So the first question I ask is there a definition for learning support? And as it stands, no. If you look through the current literature, there really isn't any clear definition for learning support. What we do have is that there are very many names for the people involved in learning support. We are variously referred to as academic support, language skills support, study skills support, student support, learning assistance, learning support. These are just some of the names found in many Australian universities where learning support in its various incarnations is a common feature. So what exactly do we do? Well, we don't teach academic content. What we do is we teach skills. Skills for academic and learning purposes. Skills in language, mathematics and statistics, learning technologies, even personal development skills such as time and study management skills. So in James Cook University, which is an Australian university, we, the Learning Centre team, have identified 3 roles that we cover as learning support. The first role is that of skill development. Through consultations and workshops, we facilitate the development of generic academic skills. For example, referencing and avoiding plagiarism. We also facilitate academic language skills for academic writing. Learning skills, such as crafting survey questionnaires, preparing oral presentations, etc. Mathematical and statistical analysis skills for quantitative analysis. And learning technology skills for navigating and using digital platforms. Our second role involves collaboration with academic teaching staff to embed within their lectures customized workshops that aim to develop specific skills in their students for mastering the specific content. Finally, we have the very important role of facilitating holistic development in our students through interaction and dialogue, because that's how we do it. So, we propose this definition. We're proposing a definition for learning support. Learning support can be defined as guidance in and facilitation of learning and life skills for holistic student development. Let me say that again. Learning support can be defined as guidance in and facilitation of learning and life skills for holistic student development. So as you mull over this definition, let's move on to the theoretical framework within which we hope to park learning support. As Nimrod has noted, we can view the work of the learning advisor through the rhetorical lens. The discourse between learning advisor and student encapsulates a journey of knowledge building and creation. And to achieve this, the learning advisor needs training to build expertise in the specialized skills related to academic success for students. The phenomenological lens draws attention to the meaning-making of the individual in the dialogue. So for the first-person experience of consciousness to be really meaningful for the student, the learning advisor needs skills in dialogic communication to enable the student to draw and make meaning from the communicative exchange. This means, therefore, that the learning advisor needs training in not just the specialized and dialogic communication skills, but also training in listening, facilitating, and empathy. And that brings us to the humanistic view. This view of the student resonates with both the rhetorical and phenomenological I always trip over this. Phenomenological lenses, because students are viewed as individuals with abilities that can be developed further for holistic and fulfilling living through guidance and facilitation via dialogic communication. Therefore, the theoretical framework places the learning advisor in the role of facilitating holistic development of students, growing their capabilities, creativity, their self-concept and well-being with dignity. So, we wish to be recognized as learning professionals with specialized skills to facilitate and enable student learning and holistic development. We are professionals with skills that extend outside of academic content teaching. And that means we deserve professional development to enable us as a profession to climb the ladder of growth, advancement, and progress, to evolve to greater levels of ability and capacity as learning professionals. So to conclude, we believe that the way forward is to study in depth the roles and functions that learning support fulfills in higher educational institutions in order to advance our work as learning professionals. And for this, I hand the floor over to Mr. Lai Fuk Ming.
Right, thanks, Hui-Ling and Nimrod. Following on from the presentation with the theoretical underpinnings and the suggested definition of learning support, I thought I'd like to share with you with a practical underpinnings of what we view as of a learning support is. I thought earlier I heard from Professor Chris Rudd. He asked a question: what's the value proposition of a university? And what does a university means to you? I think it would evoke a lot of thoughts. You probably have your own idea. Interestingly, and I resonate with his question because this slide brings into a perspective of the different players or stakeholders in the institution. To senior academic leaders, we see institution has to provide an education for the masses. To students, they sign up courses because they want to be educated, perhaps for a job, as well as perhaps to increase knowledge in the discipline. To faculty members, university is very rich environment for research. And I think research, as what Prof has said, does drive a university, and I do agree with that. So we have the key academic leaders in picture, we have the lecturers there, but very much the intention of the key leaders is to improve retention of our students, the progression, right? And also to empower them with holistic development. Lecturers, there are some lecturers who assume students who come into uni, who come to my class, they should be prepared for uni already. Perhaps some of us may have that assumption. Shouldn't they be prepared? Let's hold that question. Some may disagree, some may agree. To students who come into uni, I know in Singapore context, most of them come through the A-level route, the polytechnics. Of course, we have international students who join us through the high school. It's a big step up, you know, from wherever they have last studied. And there is also the issue of first-year experience. Are they prepared for the demands of the university study? Therefore, what is the role of learning support here? I think learning support or learning development can be a real asset to an institution, a university. Why? Because it helps to improve student retention, enhance student learning through our interaction with students when we help them in the support, as well as we work with lecturers to perhaps enrich the culture of teaching and learning in the institution. So learning support do have a role. This is coming back to the role and function. Very often, I introduce myself as, learning developer or learning advisor. And many times when I do that, I have puzzled look, what do you actually do? What's learning developer, okay, I'm in learning support. That helps to enlighten. But what do you actually do in learning support? So I have these questions, and very often I try to make it simple. I said, I help students to learn how to learn. Again, that may give more puzzled look. Well, okay, I help students to excel academically. Okay, that brings a little bit clarity. But here, certainly you see that we play multiple roles cross discipline. We teach, and we also tutor and we consult. And in case you may not know, we do research too, right? Why? To inform our own practice, as well as to inform perhaps the university policy. Very often, learning advisors approach are actually evidence-based, right? We do research based on that. We also produce material, both on printed material and digitally. And I know my colleagues from JCU, they have wonderful YouTube resources for students, right, which they help to produce. Well, we hold a humanistic view of students. Why? Because we don't see them as deficit. we don't hold a deficit model, that they come here empty. No, they are to be developed. And we think we can empower them for learning. Why? In our rhetorical conversation with them, we try to have reflective activities with them. So let them think how to get the answers rather than just telling them the answers. Definitely, we have we hold the constructivist approach in our pedagogy. Do learning advisors have pedagogy? Oh, yes, we do. Right? We have our approach. We try to be learner-centered. Right? We facilitate. We try not to be prescriptive or directive. In fact, we help them to formulate their own knowledge. These slides will show that perhaps earlier I said the first year experience. Right? The challenge of students coming in first year, I think, is enormous. I had the opportunity to lecture in a local polytechnic before I joined SIM. And the relationship between me and my students are a close one. Why? I handhold them quite a fair bit, right? But once in university, that proximity is not there anymore. It's distant. So students are expected to have certain skills. They're expected to learn how to think right critically. And if you recall, I said we don't hold a deficit model. I'm not sure if you read the book by Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, right? And I think he said he critiqued the education, that it should not be a banking model, whereby you see students has an account to deposit knowledge, right? No, we don't do that. We want to work with students. We don't work for students. I say again, we work with and not for students. I thought that's very powerful, that the approach that learning developers have to take. All right, just moving on fast. I've been told that my time is almost up. Okay, quickly, that is the provision of learning support service today. One-to-one, which many of us do, coaching, consulting. We conduct workshop, open access workshop. Sometimes we have challenges in open access workshop. The response from students can be lukewarm. Why? Because they don't see the connection. However, if we embed the learning support with our colleagues, our faculty colleagues, into those courses, we see a better response. In fact, there was a research done in UK that they found that students who come through attended embedded teaching, they have better awareness of the central support in going for open access workshop. I thought that was a good sharing. And research, right? We do research, I said earlier, and we develop learning resources. Yep. Who do we work with? More people. In fact, primarily we work with lecturers, students, right? But I'll just show you a few. With lecturers, we work with them to embed support. I think personally, embedding support is the way to go, not just through open access, because it brings relevance to students, because they see the connection of the assessment with the support that we give, and that has a better buy-in. We have seen that in SIM. We work with one of our business law lecturer. The module had suffered, in terms of passing rate. So we try to work with the lecturers to have academic writing through the module. And we are pleased to say that it's quite a good response. Okay. Right. Quickly running on learning technology staff. Yeah. We work a lot with them. In fact, I believe here in SIM, we work as subject matter experts. I think the key things that we can develop micro-learning courses. Developing is not a problem, but how to get students to use it. That is the issue. So what we try to do, we again work with our course lecturers and say, hey, we have, for example, we develop micro-learning on business stats. So we work with a business stats lecturer saying, can you use this online micro-learning course in your course? And we tried that. So that has a little bit of better utilization. Peer leaders, yes, we work with peer leaders, your EMA's peer tutor. Similarly, in SIM, we have peer tutors who work with us. In fact, we see them as a critical resource to our staff because, we are lean. But we work through students, and, well, students see that they are peers, all right? And I think one interesting point is that, again, through peer learning, it's not, by chance. We believe that it's underpinned by theories like Vygotsky. Vygotsky uses the constructivism approach, right? The zone of proximal development, right? And we know that. And it works well because peer-to-peer, and they see the value. Finishing off this one last slide here. This, I got it from a UK fellow learning advisor, Foster. In 2011, he posted in a discussion forum in the UK. He said he just wondered how to encapsulate what he does as a learning developer, and I thought it kind of show what we do. There are two dimensions here. One on the left, whether is it curriculum-based support or outside. On the top and bottom is the proximity with student or support. And I think a lot in this quadrant, the bottom left quadrant, you will see that we work a lot. We see quite a lot of impact because we impact students directly through embedded teaching, for example, and we co-facilitate lecturers, and it's curriculum-based, right? However, on the bottom right, a lot happening there, like, for example, the peer learning, all right, happens there. Although some may argue that peer learning, is it outside a curriculum? Some say, oh, no, perhaps it could be within the curriculum. That's perhaps we can open for a discussion. But you can see that here, that has learning advisors or learning developers, the four quadrants, we have a part in each of them. And you can see the diversity, the cross-disciplinary, the multidisciplinary presence that we have. Perhaps it's shown, I thought this was quite a good demonstration of what we do. And in summary, all right, we wear many hats, all right, just as is shown earlier, and we expert knowledge, actually, in how learners learn through all this framework, and all our approach are based on evidence-based approach, and is based on theoretical underpinnings. And what Hui-Ling said, we are learning professionals. We are teachers. We are expert teachers. Although we don't teach discipline subjects, but we teach language, mathematics, that support our colleagues, our faculty members. And I think I'd like to leave this question for the discussion. What Hui-Ling said and earlier, where is this third space? Very often we have an identity issue. Some academics see us as academics, some no. I have colleagues in SIM see me as a manager to manage a center. And students see me as, okay, you are expert in language. So there is a question, are we more academic or more professional, as Nimrod and Hui-Ling had shared earlier. We are in the third space, where are we actually? Perhaps, our fellow colleagues from the other institution, who's a learning advisor, could share. So perhaps we will conclude here and we'll open for discussion, right? Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mike. I'm also from the James Cook University Learning Support Department, Learning Center. I'm an English language specialist. I do help students with their academics. So I'd like to invite all the speakers so far back up on stage. I'm on my phone, but I swear I'm not on WeChat or Instagram or anything like that. I am looking at some wonderful questions here from the audience that I'd like to bring up to the speakers and also to you as well and get some feedback from everybody. Starting off with one anonymous contributor asks, I'm dealing with some students with some form of learning disability, some with perceived low self-esteem, depression perhaps, some other undiagnosed issue that we really don't feel capable of handling because we're not professionals in that area. How can we approach this problem? I'd like to start with the speakers on stage and then maybe open it up to the audience. Anything to say about that?
Okay. Again, to answer that question, I will come from a more theoretical lens, not more of practical, because I believe we have a lot of practical strategies we can do to deal with these issues. But from a more theoretical lens, I would want to be guided by the critical theory. The critical theory of teaching is about discursive reflection. A lot of reflection and self-reflection can enable students to actually understand what's happening. Because the critical theory problematizes our communicative activities with students, it problematizes or theorizes teaching as something that actually, we're trying to break hegemonic ideology. We're trying to break distorted reason. The distorted reason or distorted logic is, I am weak because I've been brought to be weak in the family. I have these fears and anxieties, and I think I'm not normal. And I think we need to break that kind of distorted logic, because to me, from the critical lens, it's a distorted reason, because everyone is capable of being strong, and everyone is capable of, accomplishing something. So if we are guided by the critical theory or the critical lens, then I think we can help our students to emancipate themselves, because the goal of critical theory is emancipation, and the goal of critical theory is consciousness raising, and the goal of critical theory is awareness and a clearer view of self. Thank you.
Anything to add? I'd like to hear from some of our colleagues from other institutions. How do you have any particular approach to this specific problem?
I'm also very fascinated by the theoretical lens that was just referred to by Dr. Nimrod. Stephen Brookfield actually talks about 4 lenses. So one is the theoretical lens, one is the experience lens, one is the student lens, and one is the peer lens. So I find that an extremely useful concept, because sometimes as lecturers we are very much judged by student evaluations, and so I also find the other 4 lenses, the 4 lenses in total, very useful.
I think that's actually a really big one. I'm no expert, but I increasingly see students who I'm pretty convinced have some form of autism, and oftentimes I struggle to figure out how best to connect to them in a way that will help them reach their learning goals or learning targets. And I don't know, I guess in my opinion, more cross-collaboration with people from, we've got a great psychology department here, for example, and that might be one way forward. Is there anything at your institution, anything in the structure that deals with these issues?
Well, I think it's an issue that is increasing. In fact, we do notice more such students are coming through the system into institutional higher learning. As I said earlier, I used to teach in the polytechnics. I don't see as many, but today I hear from my colleagues, more are coming through the polytechnics into A-levels, because the MOE system has this support system for students. But it's a question I just asked, is institutional higher learning, like us, prepared for the influx of more such students? Perhaps yes and no. In SIM, we have a department that looks after student well-being, the mental and the physical well-being. We do have policies on how to deal with students. But from the learning development, if there's a opportunity, we'll try to work with students, depending on the challenges, on coming out with a learning map on how they could cope with their daily studies, and how they can follow on if they have queries. So we do try to work with such students. We do have such structure in place too. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Any further comments about that particular question? Okay. Moving on then. What's that? The embedded question. Okay. Hui Ling would like to talk about the embedded question. In terms of embedding learning support in particular departments or particular programs in a university, sorry, where's that one?
Third question.
Third question.
How does embedding?
Right from the top.
How does embedding work in the context of branch campuses where certain departments might have very few students? It's a pretty pertinent question for us. Our business program is quite large. Our marine sciences program has a far smaller number of students. And so if we embed a specialist into the business school, then do we leave the aquaculture students out in the cold? How do we approach that?
Okay, so here in James Cook University, when we talk about embedding, we're not talking about embedding a specialist specifically only in that course. When we talk about embedding, we're really talking about us learning advisors working with the relevant respective lecturers, looking at how to bring us into a lecture for a 20-minute workshop that focuses on the specific skills for that particular subject. So regardless of whether you have a large enrollment, 100 students, or your enrollment, as in sometimes the case maybe for certain courses, 12 students, it makes no difference. As long as the lecturer sees that there is a way to bring learning advisors into the subject, into a lecture for a 20-minute workshop, embedded in there, to reach out to the students who are attending the lecture for content purposes. It means these students get to hear and get to learn the skills from the learning advisors. It also means that the students know, okay, so if I need help in this specific area, this particular learning advisor is there for me. And that's actually what we're advising, or rather we're advocating in our learning center, that you don't need a particular learning advisor embedded in a course. What you need is for lecturers to look through the curriculum of the course they're teaching and to ask themselves, can I get a learning advisor in here to work through the relevant skills so that the students who come in here, some may have those skills, some may not have. But I want to ensure that those going through my subject can pick up those skills through this embedded workshop. And just to add on to what Fok Ming was saying, I used to teach in JCs. I was a junior college teacher in my previous incarnation before coming over to James Cook University. And I have to say that it's true in junior colleges you tend to handhold the students more. But it's also true today that in junior colleges, they actually do project work, which is research education. And it does prepare them substantially for what they have to do in the university. Referencing and all that is covered in that course. So it does prepare them for the university degree. And I think our polytechnics also prepare the students for university studies. The thing is, it's up to the individual, isn't it? Would the individual pick up those skills and come in prepared? Not so much that our institutions don't prepare them, but it's where the individuals come in prepared. And that's why embedding workshops in the subject lectures is one way to reach out to those students who may not come in prepared. Thank you.
Would anyone else from a different institution like to chime in? Or the same institution?
Abhishek from JCU. My question is specific to students who are in the ESL sphere, so English as second language, where they are transitioning from language skills to literacy skills, where literacy skills, let's relabel it as more academic skills, what Hui Ling was talking about just a little bit earlier, whether it's referencing, academic writing, paraphrasing, and so forth. So what is the role of learning support, learning development, and so forth in terms of assisting students in this transition from language acquisition, or let's say language skills, to literacy skills? Thank you.
Good question.
Great question. Yeah, we often now have more students who come from countries whose English is not first language. I believe very much in JCU, in SIM, we have support whereby we have open access workshops for students in various genres of writing to help prepare them. But more specifically, lately we have taken the approach of embedding academic writing into the courses. Earlier I mentioned one of the courses is business law, where there's substantial writing, critical thinking involved, and we see challenges from international students to grapple with the language, let alone the content itself. So we thought, okay, we work with the course lecturers and says, look, how can we help you to help the students? So we invite students to open access workshop. They are lukewarm about it. So we bring ourselves to the class. And we conducted a few of them, and the response from students, of course, not all were by it, but I remember one student who mentioned to me, because we have, for example, 2 such sessions for each course. She missed the first one, but she came for the second one because my friend told me, hey, after the first one it was great, it's so helpful. And she said, I regretted not coming for the first one. Okay, I thought that was a positive response. And that's the kind of approach we try to take. Of course, we also mentioned we also have one-to-one. Of late, again, in SM, we see lots of international students. We have free drop-in session. They can come without any appointment and see first of all, our peer tutors, such like your EMAS peer tutor, or we can see our learning advisors. And we just step through with them, helping them to develop understanding of how to write better. We refrain from trying to telling them what to do to teach them, but to facilitate their learning. So we see some positive response from there. But it's still a challenge because many of these students, their favorite excuse is, I don't have time, and we see that that's the biggest challenge. Yeah.
I think for James Cook, we should wait for the next session to hear from Mike about how we help with ELPP.
So one of the questions I found here that I thought was quite interesting. Here's a new question. Let's throw this one out there. Whether study advisors or academics or service providers is an HR management decision. Is this a widespread issue, and is there any research into it?
Well, sorry. We haven't encountered research studies whether the role and the position of learning advisor and the creation of the learning advisor's identity and the creation of space is an HR issue or not. So we don't really, I'm sorry, we don't have that answer. But what I can say is that in JCU Singapore context, we ourselves are creating that identity. We are trying to create that identity. So it's a very bottom-up, ground-level creation. This creation and this drive to actually create our identity is based on experience and the struggles as well that we experience every day. That's why I'm quite a big fan of the phenomenological approach. It's the lived experience and the circumstances that you experience that allow you to think farther and to perhaps find an answer to the question. So it's pretty organic at the moment, but I think there is great opportunity to engage HR to actually help us create this space, to help us answer the question, who are we and where do we belong?
And so, the learning support definition. There was a question that asked whether the lack of a definition is a positive or a negative. Actually, I think it works both ways. I see it as a positive because it means that we can then really think through and work through and look at exactly what all of us here who are here as learning advisors in the various roles that we play, look at it and see how do we actually contribute to student development. And I think that's where, if we look at it from that perspective, arriving at a definition of some sort then gives us another positive. Because with the lack of a learning support definition, we can work out what we think should be in that definition. And then creating that definition, perhaps what we all need to do is really go in, do some research on it, work with other learning advisors around, and create a definition that opens up the window of opportunity for HR and management and other staff in higher education institutions to see us as learning professionals, not as allied staff or as some third space that doesn't belong anywhere because we don't know where to park you, but as learning professionals contributing actively to student success and student development, holistic development.
I'd just like to add, I think it's a question that's the reason why we're here for this discourse on, on where we are. Is there research? In fact, in preparing for this, I have read, tried to do my own research, and I found that our UK counterparts, there is a great discussion through the discussion forum, the community of practice. They ask a question, should they be on academic contract? Should they be on academic contract or professional contract? Academic contract or professional contract? So that's a question that the UK learning are asking. So some are on different contracts. But if you are on academic contracts, you have to be appraised by HR based on the academic terms. That means you may have to produce research, a certain percentage of your appraisals on research. But learning advisors, many of our time is on service engagement. We work with students. We do research, yes, but perhaps the component, the percentage is lesser. So does it mean that should we be on a professional contract? That's a question. Just to share in SIM within my team, some are here. Some of us are, like myself, we are on the academic contract, but during my appraisal time, one of the components that's taken out is teaching or discipline subjects. That is not appraised for me. But how I work with students, that is part of my appraisal. But I'm on the academic contract. I have some colleagues on professional contract. So they are appraised differently. They are not appraised on teaching, but based on how they engage and work with students one-to-one. Yeah, so it is perhaps a HR question, but yeah, question, should we be on academic or professional contract? I think this discussion is still ongoing in the UK and in Australian learning advisors. Very much so back here in Singapore too. Mm.
It's a bureaucratic third space, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear some comments from the audience on that one. Anyone from different institutions like to chime in? Sure. This is Ms. Gandhi. She's the head of the foundation department here.
Hi, good morning to all of you. I think we had a wonderful session this morning. Well, I'm glad I picked up quite a lot from this session, this symposium. And what I just want to say is, I just concur with Wee-Ling, because I think it's not really important to identify whether they're professionals or they're academic. I think the important role that they're playing, as long as they fulfill the role in their function, I think that is good enough. And as my colleague Mike had said, it's a bureaucratic thing with each institution. Whether they park them as professionals or academics, I think we leave it to them, as long as they do their job as well as what they are supposed to do. Thank you very much.
I'm Charles Lee with the University of Newcastle. I'm an academic, not in teaching and learning. My colleague here is from teaching and learning. She's going to present, so she's keeping quiet. Yeah, I kind of disagree with what the earlier statement is. Well, not quite disagree, but the gap between teaching, learning, and academics, I see a big gap. The gaps are, well, a lot to discuss, but perhaps, I guess we had a previous teaching and learning many years ago that had a big issue of her level being not at academic level, because well, it's just a perception, the academics are, perhaps not me, looking at them as a certain level and so on and so forth, right? And the teaching and learning advisor not being able to access research grants and all that we had. So that's, that perceived gap, which is real. For me personally, I believe that the teaching and learning advisor should be almost like an academic. That's my personal opinion, that they should have so on and so forth, all the salary scales. So that's how I think. Yeah, University Newcastle in Singapore has changed. That the teaching and learning advisor is pretty much access to grants, and we're all together in research and so on and so forth, I think. But I think it still needs to be worked on in terms of, I don't know about a salary scale, but in terms of those things, yeah, that's just my opinion. Thanks.
And thank you, sir, for that. And in JCU Singapore, the culture is that JCU Singapore is very supportive of research. And to tell you the truth, we conduct research as well. I mean, they give us that time to actually, contribute to knowledge. And I think that's a very good thing.
The final question I wanted to look at, Nimrod, you were talking earlier about the rhetorical lens that you view learning support through. And there's a question here about the rhetorical lenses that students from Confucian education systems might see compared to students from Western education systems. So if anyone has any comments on that, I'm obviously a product of the Western education system, and I see Singapore kind of at being on the crossroads of the two influences. Maybe some locals can step in there and provide some more insight into that.
I think, well, two things for me. Number one, Confucianism, to me, is closely connected to humanism, not more of rhetoric. Because Confucianism, well, if I remember from my primary grades to secondary grades, Confucius is just big in my country, in the Philippines, and it has quite a thicker pages in our textbooks. And I was actually asking why, so now I'm trying to figure out the answer. So Confucianism, in my understanding, is viewing students from a holistic, humanistic point of view, that they are capable of creativity and that they can find their way, the Tao. I think the Tao is quite something that's quite vivid in my head, the way. So it's more of learning from every angle, learning from experience to develop themselves and to find a way. And that way is to give back to their community. And that's a very humanistic lens. But the question is, there is some kind of students from the Confucianist education compared to students from Western cultures. My experience with, in teaching with students from the Western cultures is that there's a strong independence and a strong agency, and they know what they have in mind. So, for instance, some German students coming to me would say, Nimrod, I only have 2 things to ask you, and then that's it. So that's there's a sense of agency there. And I think the Western education has created that kind of, potential and the ability to actually own their learning. In some Asian contexts that may or may not have Confucius influence, there's a little bit of timidity to open up, and that we need to understand that as a factor for us to be able to understand them and to, access their world. So that's kind of a challenge. There's timidity, there's some kind of reserved space, there's some kind of, okay, I need to understand and to wait before I can really open up. Oh, well, that's something, it may not be Confucius, it may not just be an Asian culture in my experience. So, yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Okay, on that note, I think we'll take a coffee break now, shall we?
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your attention.